70 films, 4 Academy Awards, 7 decades standing in front of a camera, and then, for most of that time, standing behind one as well. A man who arrived in Hollywood in the early 1950s as an unpaid contract player, so unremarkable that a studio talent executive reportedly told him his Adam's apple stuck out too far, and who left it as one of the most decorated filmmakers in the history of the medium. He directed 40 films. 5 different actors won Academy Awards under his direction. 2 of his pictures won Best Picture. He was born in San Francisco in May of 1930, in the first full year of the Great Depression, and he was still directing feature films in his 90s, which is not a record that anyone in the industry expects to see broken. And in all of that time, across all of those interviews, press junkets, award shows, and profiles, there is one subject he has almost never discussed in any real detail. His own children. There are 8 of them. 6 mothers. 42 years separate the birth of the first from the birth of the last, which means the age gap between his oldest child and his youngest child is wider than the age gap between many people and their own grandparents. And for most of his life, the vast majority of the public had no idea that most of them existed at all. One of them spent more than 3 decades of her life not knowing who her father was, while he spent those same 3 decades not knowing that she had ever been born. One of them was kept secret from him for roughly a year after her birth, raised in a house that he quietly paid to furnish. One of them grew up on a Hawaiian island under a different surname entirely, tended bar in Los Angeles while practicing audition lines behind the counter, and later lost the woman he loved to a defect in a car that had been recalled and never repaired. One of them walked away from acting altogether at the peak of her family access and now spends her days pulling dogs out of high-kill shelters in the San Fernando Valley. And one of them, a jazz bassist who scores films for a living, was the person who finally told the world, almost offhandedly, in an interview with a French broadcaster, that the most prolific director in modern American cinema had stopped making movies. This is not the story of Clint Eastwood. That story you already know. You have seen the poncho and the cigarillo, the magnum, the empty chair, the Oscars. This is the story of the 8 people who carry the consequences of that story, and who have spent their entire lives being introduced by way of somebody else's name. And there is one photograph that captures the whole strange arithmetic of it. In December of 2018, at the Regency Village Theatre in Westwood, the family gathered for the premiere of a film called The Mule. Clint was 88 years old. He stood on the carpet in a green blazer between his first wife, Maggie Johnson, then 87, and his girlfriend, Christina Sandera. Around him were sons, daughters, in-laws, and a granddaughter. Afterwards, his youngest daughter, Morgan, posted about the evening online with a caption that told you everything about how this family actually functions. She wrote that it was extremely rare for all 8 Eastwood siblings to be in one room. Rare. Not for a wedding, not for a funeral, for a movie premiere. 8 people related by blood to the same man who had never all been in the same photograph before, and who, as far as the public record shows, have not all been in one since. So let me take you through it properly, one by one, oldest to youngest, because what actually happened to these 8 people is stranger, quieter, and in places far more painful than anyone watching a Dirty Harry marathon would ever guess. Start with the one whose existence he did not learn about for 30 years. Her name is Lori Murray, and she was born on the 11th of February, 1954, in Washington State. At the time, Clint Eastwood was 23 years old. He was not a movie star. He was not anything at all yet. He had done a stint in the army at Fort Ord. He had drifted through a series of manual jobs, and he had only just begun scratching around the edges of the picture business. The circumstances of Lori's birth were handled the way an enormous number of American pregnancies were handled in the middle of the 1950s, which is to say, with silence and paperwork. Her biological mother's identity has never been publicly disclosed and remains unknown to this day. The baby was placed for adoption almost immediately. Lori grew up in Washington, raised by adoptive parents, in a family with no connection to Hollywood whatsoever. She married a man named Lowell Thomas Murray III in 1979. She had 2 children of her own, a son and a daughter. She built an ordinary, comfortable, entirely private American life, while the man whose genes she carried was becoming, in those same decades, one of the most photographed faces on the planet. She was watching the same movies as everyone else. Then, somewhere around the late 1980s, when she was in her 30s, Laurie began doing what a great many adoptees eventually decide to do. She went looking through her adoption records. She was not looking for a celebrity. She was looking for the answer to the ordinary human question of where she came from. And the paper trail she followed ended in a place that no one searching an adoption file is prepared for. What happened next is the part that people tend to find surprising. There was no lawsuit. There was no tabloid deal. There was no press conference. According to a family friend quoted in the British press years later, Laurie and her family were financially comfortable in their own right, and this was never a case of somebody appearing out of nowhere looking for money. She reached out, and Clint Eastwood, who had not known she existed, accepted her. And then, slowly and without any announcement, she was simply folded into the family. The first time most of the public ever saw her was in 2004. Eastwood arrived at the Academy Awards that year with $1 Million Baby about to sweep the ceremony, and on the red carpet with him were his mother, Ruth, then in her 90s, and a woman the cameras did not recognize. That was Laurie. 14 years later, she was there again at the premiere of The Mule, standing with 7 half-siblings, several of whom she had known for less than half her life. She has given almost no interviews. She has no public social media presence. She does not use the Eastwood name professionally. She has grandchildren of her own now, which makes Clint Eastwood a great-grandfather through a daughter he did not know he had until he was nearly 60. And of all the 8, hers is arguably the most quietly remarkable outcome, because she is the only one who got to find out what her life would have looked like without him, and then chose to keep living exactly that life afterward. Which brings us to the second child, and a secret of a very different kind. Kimber Lynn Eastwood was born on the 17th of June, 1964, in Los Angeles. Her mother was Roxanne Tunis, an actress, dancer, and stuntwoman who had met Eastwood on the set of the television western Rawhide, the series that made him a household name before the Italian westerns made him an international one. At the time, Eastwood was married to Maggie Johnson, and the relationship with Tunis went on for years. Here is the detail that separates Kimber's story from everything else in this family. By multiple accounts, Tunis did not tell Eastwood she was pregnant. She did not tell him after the birth either. He is reported to have learned that he had a daughter only when the child was around a year old. Roxanne Tunis kept her daughter almost entirely out of the industry's line of sight, and she did it deliberately. She later moved away from performing altogether and became a teacher of transcendental meditation. In 1997, a photographer captured Tunis, Kimber, and Kimber's young son at home in Camarillo, in a house that was reportedly furnished almost entirely by Eastwood. It is one of the very few images from that period that exists at all, and it tells you a great deal about the arrangement. Supported, provided for, and kept quiet. Kimber tried acting first. She appeared in a low-budget picture in 1989, and in 1997 she turned up briefly in Absolute Power, one of her father's own films, playing a White House tour guide. But acting was not where she landed. What she found instead was a trade. She became a makeup artist, not a celebrity makeup artist trading on a famous surname, but a working department professional in television, which is one of the least glamorous and most relentless jobs in the business. She spent close to 2 decades on the crew of Wheel of Fortune. She worked on Dog the Bounty Hunter, and she has been open about why that particular game show meant something to her personally, describing a grandmother from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and a childhood of watching Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy every single night. There is something genuinely touching about that. A woman whose paternity was a Hollywood secret ended up making her living on the set of the show her family watched together in the evenings. From 2008 onward, she added producing to her resume, and she has produced a string of independent films since. She has been married 3 times, most recently to producer Sean Midkiff in 2014. She has one son, born in 1984, which meant that Clint Eastwood became a grandfather at 53, roughly 2 years before he became a father again. Roxanne Tunis, the woman who kept the secret, died in June of 2023 at the age of 93. The third child is the one you have heard, even if you have never heard of him. Kyle Eastwood was born on the 19th of May, 1968, the first child of Clint and Maggie Johnson, and he grew up, not in Beverly Hills, but on the central California coast around Carmel, in a house where the record player was as important as the television. Both of his parents were serious jazz listeners. He has described a childhood sound tracked by Miles Davis, Dave Brubeck, and Thelonious Monk, and he has said that his father's obsession with the music was the single largest influence on his life. He went to the University of Southern California to study film for 2 years, which was the expected path. Then he abandoned it. He picked up the bass instead, learned largely by ear, and eventually went to study under the French bassist Bunny Brunel. He became a session player in the early 1990s, formed his own quartet, and in 1996 that quartet performed at a Carnegie Hall concert held in honor of his father's lifelong devotion to jazz. In 1998, Sony released his debut album as a leader, From There to Here. And then something happened that almost never happens in nepotism stories. He got better, and he kept going, and the conversation about him gradually stopped being about his surname. He put out Paris Blue in 2004, Now in 2006, Metropolitain in 2009, Songs from the Chateau in 2011, The View from Here in 2013, Timepieces in 2015, In Transit in 2017, and Cinematic in 2019. He has played thousands of concerts across Europe, where he spends much of his time, and where his reputation as a straight-ahead post-bop bandleader is entirely his own. Alongside that, he built a second career that pulled him directly back into his father's orbit. Working with the composer Michael Stevens, Kyle scored or contributed music to a long list of Clint Eastwood films, including Mystic River, $1 Million Baby, Letters from Iwo Jima, Gran Torino, and Invictus. In 2009, he received a Golden Globe nomination alongside Stevens and Jamie Cullum for the title song from Gran Torino. He also scored his sister Allison's directorial debut. In 2023, he released Eastwood Symphonic, an orchestral suite built from the themes of his father's films, performed on a European symphony tour. A son writing a full orchestral tribute to his father, while the father was still alive to hear it, is not a common thing in any family, let alone this one. Kyle has a daughter, Graylin, born in 1994, from an earlier marriage. He married Cynthia Ramirez in 2014 at the Mission Ranch in Carmel, a property his father has owned since the 1980s, and it was Kyle, in the end, who closed the book. In an interview with French broadcaster France 3, conducted in late 2025 and unearthed by the press around his father's 96th birthday in May of 2026, Kyle said plainly that his father had retired. He spoke about it with no drama at all. He said he had a lot of good memories of working with him, that his father was retired now, and that he had been very lucky to work with him on so many films. That was it. That was the announcement. 70 years of American cinema wrapped up in 3 sentences from the bass player. The fourth child took the opposite journey. She went into the family business, went a long way with it, and then deliberately walked out. Allison Eastwood was born on the 22nd of May, 1972, in Santa Monica, the second child of Clint and Maggie Johnson. Like Kyle, she was raised away from Los Angeles on the Central Coast, which she has described as a genuinely magical way to grow up, and which she credits with keeping her normal. Her father, she has said, always made time, even when he was working, and was a far more relaxed man in private than any of the characters he played. She was 11 years old when she made her film debut, playing his daughter in the 1984 thriller Tightrope, a performance that earned her a Young Artist Award nomination. She modeled as a young woman, appearing in major fashion publications. Then, in 1997, she had the year that should have made her. She appeared in Absolute Power with her father, and she starred in Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, which he directed, opposite Kevin Spacey and John Cusack. She was 25, she was in a prestige studio picture from a major director, and the road ahead of her was as open as a road gets. In 2007, she moved behind the camera and directed her first feature, Rails and Ties, starring Kevin Bacon and Marcia Gay Harden. With a score by her brother Kyle, she directed again in 2017 with Battle Creek. She appeared in her father's The Mule in 2018, and then she stopped. She has said publicly that she retired from acting in 2018. What she found instead started with a single conversation in a public animal shelter in the San Fernando Valley. She was new to rescue work at the time. A couple arrived with 2 dogs, and she asked them why they were surrendering the animals. They told her their mother had died the previous week. These had been her dogs, and they did not want them. Allison has described being genuinely horrified. She has said it shook her to her core, that she could not believe people treated animals as disposable, and that she quickly learned it happens constantly. In 2011, she co-created and executive-produced a television series called Animal Intervention, which she sold to Nat Geo Wild. In 2012, she founded the Eastwood Ranch Foundation in Agoura Hills, California, an animal welfare and rescue organization focused on pulling dogs and cats out of high-kill shelters and reducing pet overpopulation through spay and neuter programs and adoption partnerships. She has fostered as many as 20 animals in her own home at once, and unlike a great many celebrity charities, this one has kept growing. In 2024, the foundation opened a full rescue center with modern kennel space and dedicated veterinary care. In August of 2025, a benefit concert featuring guests including Dave Grohl and Gene Simmons raised $50,000 for the organization. In February of 2026, a Valentine's adoption event placed more than 30 rescue cats and dogs into homes. In April of 2026, the foundation hosted a legislative press event at its Agoura Hills Adoption Center in support of a California bill aimed at expanding low-cost spay and neuter access. And in January of 2026, she lent her name to a campaign in Michigan pushing to end taxpayer-funded dog experiments. Working alongside a medical ethics nonprofit, she has been married to the sculptor Stacy Poitras since 2013, and they live in Los Angeles. She has no children. She traded a career that most actors would sell a decade of their lives for, and she traded it for a kennel in Agoura Hills, and by every available account she has never once suggested she regrets it. The 5th child is the one most people can name, and his story contains the hardest thing in this entire family history. Scott Eastwood was born on the 21st of March, 1986. His mother was Jocelyn Reeves, a flight attendant, and by every account she wanted nothing to do with the machinery of celebrity. She raised Scott and, 2 years later, his sister Catherine in Hawaii, deliberately and completely outside the industry. Scott has described the arrangement with characteristic bluntness, saying he lived with his mother in Hawaii until he annoyed her, and then went to live with his father and annoyed him too. He came to California for high school, and it was during those years that the relationship with his father actually formed. There is a story he has told about that period that is more revealing than any red carpet quote. As a teenager, he took his 14-year-old sister to a party, went to get a beer, and left her on her own. When his father found out, Scott says he was physically reprimanded and told, in absolutely unambiguous terms, that you never leave your sister at a party, ever. He has called it very old school. He also, notably, tells it as a story about a father who was paying attention. When he decided to act, He did not use the family name. He billed himself as Scott Reeves, using his mother's surname, specifically to avoid the accusation of nepotism, and he did that for years. He worked as a bartender in Los Angeles, running lines behind the counter between orders. When he did appear in Gran Torino in 2008, he was paid the Screen Actors Guild minimum for a bit part. He has said he auditioned for essentially every one of his father's films and was rejected for plenty of them. He eventually took the Eastwood name and built a genuine career on it, with roles in The Longest Ride, Fury, Suicide Squad, The Fate of the Furious, Fast X, and more recently Alarum and Regretting You. But in September of 2014, something happened that reframed everything about him. A 26-year-old woman named Jewel Brangman, an aspiring model and actress whom Scott had dated, was driving a rented 2001 Honda Civic from San Diego through Los Angeles County. She rear-ended a van. By any normal standard, it was a minor collision, but the car's airbag inflator had been manufactured by the Japanese company Takata, and it was defective. It ruptured on deployment and sent metal shrapnel into the cabin. Jewel Brangman died from her injuries. She was the 8th confirmed death worldwide linked to the defect, and the first person known to have been killed by one while driving a rental car. Honda later confirmed that the vehicle had been recalled in 2009 and never repaired, despite 4 separate notices being sent to its owners. The recall would eventually grow to more than 33 million inflators, the largest automotive recall in United States history. Scott did not speak about it for 2 years. When he finally did, in a 2016 interview, he described it in language that was raw and unedited, and he admitted that he had never told anyone. He said he had lost friends before, but he had never lost someone he had been genuinely close to. He also admitted something that reflected badly on him, which is that he had never contacted her father. Alexander Brangman, who had filed a wrongful death lawsuit and had testified before the United States Senate about rental cars with unrepaired recalls, said publicly that he had been hurt and disappointed by that silence, that many of Jewel's friends had flown across the country for her memorial and that not even flowers had arrived. The day after that interview ran, Scott called him and apologized. Alexander Brangman told the press that Scott had said he had not reached out because he did not know what to say and that he had been very apologetic. It is not a flattering story. Scott has never tried to make it one. But he told it, publicly, at a moment when the defect it involved was still killing people, and that decision put a face on a recall that most of the public was ignoring. He is 40 now. In June of 2026, he spoke at length on a podcast about growing up with a famous parent, and what he said explains an enormous amount about this entire family. He said his father deliberately raised his children away from Los Angeles to keep them normal. He said he has seen behavior in the film business that would not be tolerated in any other industry, and that his father never behaved that way, because his father's entire philosophy was to put your boots on and go to work. Earlier, after the death of his father's longtime partner Christina Sandera in July of 2024, Scott had summed the old man up in a single line. He said his father was born coming out of the Great Depression and was young during the Second World War, that he had seen a lot of struggle, and that in their family you do not complain and you do not whine, you just do. The 6th child is the one you almost certainly cannot picture, and that appears to be entirely on purpose. Catherine Eastwood was born in 1988 on the California coast, the second child of Clint Eastwood and Jocelyn Reeves, and Scott's only full sibling. Like her brother, she was raised largely in Hawaii, well away from the industry, by a mother who had no interest in the spotlight. The public met her exactly once, and it was a big introduction. In January of 2005, at the age of 16, she served as Miss Golden Globe at the 62nd Golden Globe Awards, the traditional ceremonial role given to the child of a Hollywood figure. It was, by any measure, a spectacular night to be handed that job. Her father won Best Director that evening for $1 Million Baby, and there are press room photographs of the two of them together, the veteran and the teenager, on what was one of the great nights of his career. And then she essentially disappeared. She began acting nearly a decade later, making her feature debut in 2014 in Jersey Boys, directed by her father, in a small credited part. She took roles that year in several independent shorts. She moved into horror and thriller work, appearing in and co-writing segments of a zombie anthology released in 2018. And she has continued to work in independent film and short-form projects, including as a screenwriter. She does not maintain public social media. She rarely appears at events. She was one of the two siblings absent from the group of family members who walked the carpet at the Mule premiere. Though she was present at the wider gathering, in a family where several members have chosen visibility, and one has chosen an entirely private life outside the industry, Catherine occupies a strange middle position. She works in film. She simply refuses to be looked at while she does it. The seventh child grew up under more cameras than any of the others, and has spent her adult life recalibrating from it. Francesca Eastwood was born in 1993. Her mother is the British-born actress Frances Fisher, who had appeared opposite Eastwood in Pink Cadillac in 1989, and then, far more memorably, in Unforgiven in 1992, the film that won him his first Best Picture and Best Director Oscars. Fisher would go on to a long career of her own, including Titanic and The Lincoln Lawyer. Francesca's childhood was different from every other Eastwood child's in one specific way. Her parents did not hide her from the work. She has said that they brought her along to film sets constantly, and that at the time she is not sure she appreciated how unusual that access was. In 2012, she appeared alongside her stepmother Dina and her half-sister Morgan in a reality series built around the family. In 2013, she followed her half-sister Catherine's path and served as Miss Golden Globe. She has worked steadily since, with roles in Jersey Boys, Final Girl, Outlaws and Angels, and the 2017 thriller MFA, which both of her parents attended the premiere of together more than a decade after their own relationship had ended. There is one credit of hers that stands out above all the others as a piece of craft. In 2017, she and Frances Fisher appeared in the same episode of the television series Fargo, playing the young and the older version of the same character, a mother and a daughter, cast as one woman across time. In an industry that trades constantly on nepotism, that is one of the very few instances where the family relationship was actually the artistic point. In 2024, she appeared in Juror Number 2, her father's courtroom drama, and as it now turns out, his final film as a director. Her personal life has moved decisively toward the private. Her son Titan was born in September of 2018, with the actor Alexander Wraith. In May of 2025, she announced she was expecting her second child, posing in the same dress her mother had worn while pregnant with her. She revealed the sex of the baby at a party where Titan cut into a cake and shouted that it was blue. In October of 2025, she announced the birth of her second son with a set of black and white photographs and a 2-word caption. Day 1. She has continued to work through all of it, with projects in production into 2026, which leaves the youngest and the one who got a version of Clint Eastwood that none of the other 7 did. Morgan Eastwood was born on the 12th of December 1996, the only child of Eastwood and the news anchor Dina Ruiz, whom he married that same year and remained married to until 2014. She had bit parts as a child in $1 Million Baby and Changeling. She appeared in the family reality series in 2012 alongside her mother and Francesca. But the thing worth understanding about Morgan is what her father said about raising her, because it is the closest he has ever come to publicly assessing himself as a parent. In 2008, when he was 78 and she was 11, he told an interviewer that he had spent his younger years working all over the world and that he was a much better father the second time around. He said his daughter took precedence over everything. He said he went to all of the softball games and looked ridiculous out there because almost every other father was decades younger than him, but that it was fun and that you appreciate a lot more when you get to his age. That is a 78-year-old man with 4 Academy Awards saying, in effect, that he got it wrong the first time and was trying to get it right. Morgan has stayed almost entirely out of the industry. In May of 2024, she announced she was expecting her first child. In June of 2024, she and Tanner Koopmans married in a small ceremony in Carmel, the town where her father has lived for decades and once served as mayor. She told a magazine that they had wanted every element of the day to feel as relaxed as possible. On the 20th of September, 2024, she gave birth to a daughter named Cleo. Her mother left a comment under the announcement saying that she was real, that their lives were already better, and that she was happy for all of them. Clint Eastwood was 94 years old. So where does that leave all of them right now, in the summer of 2026? He turned 96 on the 31st of May. He has retired, quietly, without a farewell tour, without a press release, without a statement of any kind from the man himself. His last performance on camera was Cry Macho in 2021, which he also directed at 91. His last film as a director was Juror No. 2 in 2024, a picture he did not attend the premiere of, and which Warner Bros. Gave a limited theatrical release that many in the industry felt was beneath the work. It grossed around $27 million worldwide and then dominated streaming charts. As a closing statement for a 40-film directing career, it was characteristically undramatic. He simply finished the job and stopped. His 8 children are scattered across an enormous range of American life. Laurie Murray is 72 and has been a private citizen her entire life, a woman with grandchildren who found her father through an adoption file. Kimber is 62 and has spent decades as a working makeup department professional and producer. Kyle is 58 and plays bass in European concert halls when he is not writing orchestral tributes to his father's filmography. Allison is 54 and runs an animal rescue operation in Agoura Hills that keeps expanding. Scott is 40 and is one of the more visible working actors of his generation. Catherine is in her late 30s, writes and acts in independent film, and has made herself almost completely invisible. Francesca is in her early 30s with 2 small sons. Morgan is 29 with a daughter of her own. Between them, there is a jazz bassist, an animal rescuer, a makeup artist, a screenwriter, 2 actors, a producer, and 1 woman who has never worked in the business at all. What is genuinely striking, when you lay all 8 lives side by side, is how few of them chased the thing their father had. Only Scott has pursued mainstream stardom in a serious way, and he spent years working under a different surname specifically to avoid the shortcut. Allison had a clear run at it, and left. Kyle went into a different art form entirely. Catherine works in the industry but refuses to be seen. Kimber went into a trade. Laurie never came near it. And the reason for that appears to trace directly back to a decision their father made a very long time ago, which Scott articulated in 2026 more clearly than anyone else in the family ever has. Clint Eastwood raised his children away from Los Angeles on purpose. He kept them off sets, out of magazines, and away from the business, and he did it because he wanted them to grow up as ordinary people. He said as much himself, in his own way. Asked once why he refused to discuss his personal life, he explained that there were other people involved, and that those people were vulnerable. He said he could protect himself, but that they could not. You can argue about how well he lived up to that. A man who fathered 8 children by 6 women across 42 years, who did not know about one of them for 30 years and was not told about another for a year, has a complicated record as a father and has never pretended otherwise. But whatever the arithmetic of his private life, the outcome for his children is measurable, and it is unusual. There are no public feuds over an estate. There are no memoirs settling scores. There is no wreckage. There is a group of people in their late 20s to their early 70s who mostly work for a living, who are civil to one another, and who show up when it matters, which is why that photograph from December of 2018 lands the way it does. 8 people, 6 mothers, 4 decades of birthdays between the first and the last, standing in one room at the Regency Village Theatre because their father had a movie coming out. His first wife was in the picture. So was his girlfriend. So was the daughter who found him through an adoption record, and the granddaughter who was born before 2 of his own children. It should not have worked. On paper, it is a family that had every reason to fracture completely. Instead, they turned up, stood together for about 90 seconds of camera flashes, and then went back to their lives and got on with the ordinary business of being people. Clint Eastwood spent 70 years playing men who existed entirely alone. The drifter with no name, the cop with no partner who lasted, the gunfighter who rides out of town at the end because there is nowhere for him to stay. It is the single most durable image he ever created, and it made him one of the wealthiest and most decorated figures in the history of his industry. And then, at 96, he stopped working. Not on a soundstage, not in a hail of gunfire, in a house on the California coast, in a town he once ran, with 8 children, a considerable number of grandchildren, and at least 1 great-grandchild scattered across 2 continents, almost none of whom the public could pick out of a lineup. For a man who built an entire career on being the last one standing, that turns out to be a very strange and rather beautiful ending. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It genuinely helps the channel grow and lets me keep making these deep dives into the families behind the names we all think we know. And drop a comment below and let me know which of the 8 surprised you the most. I'll see you in the next one.